You hear the name Adam Smith and you probably instantly think of the ultimate champion of unfettered free markets, the invisible hand, and absolutely zero government intervention, right? His name gets thrown around constantly today to justify completely hands-off policies. But when we actually go back and read the historical texts, that simplistic caricature falls apart pretty quickly. Welcome to this explainer where we are going to dig in and uncover the real Adam Smith.
Here's our roadmap for today. We'll start with the Adam Smith myth, look at his grand moral system, his pragmatic justifications for government intervention, the massive costs of capitalism he actually warned us about, and finally, how he wanted to organize public services.
Section 1. The Adam Smith myth, the caricature of capitalism. To help us figure this all out, we're relying heavily on an incredibly meticulous analysis by Andrew Skinner called Adam Smith and Economic Liberalism, published by the David Hume Institute. Skinner basically investigates all these bizarre, modern claims made by policymakers who loudly declare themselves to be Adam Smith's true intellectual descendants. And his main takeaway? You really have to study The Wealth of Nations closely to grasp its actual policy message.
There is this famous quote from Professor George Stigler that really captures the modern myth championed by the Chicago School of Economics. He said, "Adam Smith is alive and well and living in Chicago." It's a catchy quote basically highlighting the popular doctrine that the government should just completely butt out of private industry. It's an appealing, super simple idea, but Skinner points out that Smith's actual historical position is way subtler and frankly far more interesting than that quote would have you believe.
Which brings us to Section 2. A grand moral system, the complete philosophy. Here is the absolute biggest thing the strict laissez-faire caricature misses. Smith wasn't just some numbers guy. He was a moral philosopher. His economics were just one part of a massive, comprehensive moral framework. Years before he ever published on economics, he lectured on ethics in The Theory of Moral Sentiments, diving deep into social psychology and moral judgment. Then he taught jurisprudence, explaining the evolution of government and law. It was only after laying all that groundwork that he finally published The Wealth of Nations. You literally cannot isolate his economic theories from his deep, foundational understanding of ethics and human society.
Section 3. Justifying government intervention. The pragmatist.
So if he wasn't purely anti-government, we need to ask, where exactly did he want the state to step in? Well, Smith was a pragmatist. He knew human beings aren't perfectly rational, calculating machines. He talked about this concept, what we'd now call a defective telescopic faculty. Essentially, we are just really bad at perceiving our own long-term interests. Because of that natural human flaw, Smith argued the state is entirely justified in stepping in to save us from our own lack of forethought. For example, he specifically supported taxes on the retail sale of liquor just to stop alehouses from popping up everywhere, all in the name of the public interest.
And he went way farther than just taxing alehouses. Smith advocated for state intervention in areas that would shock modern purists. He was totally fine with retaliatory trade tariffs. He wanted to regulate mortgages. He even advocated for the government to cap interest rates, specifically so loans would go to sober people instead of irresponsible prodigals. And perhaps most amazingly, he pushed for strict banking regulations. He actually likened regulating the banks to building party walls to stop urban fires from spreading. He believed that if someone's natural liberty endangers the whole society, the law absolutely ought to restrain them. I mean, you really have to wonder what Adam Smith would have made of our modern stock market crashes.
Let's move to Section 4, the costs of capitalism, the empath.
Underneath all his economic models, Smith was incredibly empathetic. He basically issued a stark warning label for the very economic growth he was documenting. Just listen to this quote. He said that a person whose whole life is spent doing a few simple, repetitive operations generally becomes as stupid and ignorant as it is possible for a human creature to become. Wow. He celebrated the division of labor for making nations wealthy, sure, but he clearly saw that it physically and mentally degrades the working poor. To him, this was a massive market failure that demanded a fix.
His solution to that factory floor degradation was a radical infringement on natural liberty for the 18th century, mandatory public education. He argued the government must step in to educate the great body of the people, mainly because the working poor just didn't have the time or money to do it themselves. He even laid out a specific curriculum, reading, writing, accounting, geometry, and mechanics. And get this, he suggested forcing every man to pass an exam in these subjects before they were even legally allowed to set up a trade.
But his worries didn't stop at the factory doors. He was also deeply concerned about the psychological toll of modern cities. He noticed that when a poor worker moves from a tight-knit small village into a sprawling city, they are suddenly sunk in obscurity and darkness. They lose what he called the mirror of society, that community accountability that keeps our moral conduct in check. Left totally isolated, Smith observed that these folks naturally gravitate towards small, super strict, unsocial religious sects just to find community, which ends up breeding intense sectarian bitterness. So how do you fix urban alienation and bitterness? His two-step government remedy is honestly brilliant. Step 1, demand an educated middle class by insisting on scientific probation for anyone entering a liberal profession. He saw science as the ultimate antidote to superstition. Step 2, and I absolutely love this coming from the father of capitalism, he said the government should actively fund and encourage the arts, painting, music, dancing, drama, satire. He wanted it all publicly encouraged to bring people together and dissipate the folly of societal bitterness. Okay, so let's pause for a second. We've got banking regulations, mandatory education, public funding for the arts. Having identified all these massive social responsibilities, the natural next question is, how on earth did Adam Smith plan to pay for it all?
That brings us to Section 5, Organizing Public Services. The Architect.
His views on public finance are surprisingly modern, leaning heavily into efficiency and fairness. He split funding into 2 buckets. For stuff that benefits the whole society, like a standing army for national defense, he said general taxation is the way to go, scaled to what people can actually afford. But for specific benefits, he vastly preferred user fees and tolls. Smith firmly believed that wherever you can, a service should fund itself. He wanted the structure to directly engage the motives of the people involved. He even thought court clerks and judges should be paid directly by court fees to make the justice system more competitive and efficient.
And 0. That is the exact number of bridges Adam Smith thought the general public should pay for if it's just being built out in a desert somewhere for the sake of one wealthy person's private interest. He strongly argued against central governments using general revenue for local roads. Direct tolls, in his mind, were the only way to ensure infrastructure is built where there's an actual, recognizable need, keeping politicians from wasting taxpayer money just to improve the view from a neighboring palace.
But it wasn't just about efficiency. It was about equity. Smith actually suggested that tolls should be intentionally set higher on luxury goods. Think about that for a second. He envisioned a system where the indolence and vanity of the rich easily subsidizes the cheaper transportation of heavy goods and everyday necessities for everybody else. Tax the luxury to relieve the poor. We're going to leave you with this final thought. We've just seen through Andrew Skinner's analysis that the historical father of capitalism firmly believed in banking regulations, mandatory public education, government-funded arts, and heavily taxing the luxuries of the wealthy to subsidize the poor. It really begs the question, if Adam Smith wasn't purely laissez-faire, what else are we getting completely wrong about the foundations of modern capitalism? It's amazing how fully understanding the depth of our historical sources can totally reshape the economic debates we're having today. Thanks so much for joining us for this explainer.